It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me. Craig, shut up.
Hey, I need you guys to do these things.
You're like a beautiful mind. I'm more like Forrest Gump. So welcome to another Reality Check with Craig Price. I am your host, Craig Price. And this week we have Michael Redmond talking risk management. This is the last of 3 episodes that we've done that tie into the Rochester Project Management Institute Professional Development Day. I hope you enjoyed this unique perspectives on project management and things that we bring to the table. And risk management is one of the things I have it on last because it's one of the things that people think about last, and it should be a little more forethought involved when it comes to risk management. It's one of these things you need to think about. What could go wrong? We live in a culture that is all about success, and it's all about what are we going to do when we achieve success. And so often we just disregard obstacles. We disregard what could cause problems. Even down to the littlest things like what happens if there's a snow day? What do you do at that point? And some of these things really pop up when you need them the most. So whether it's succession planning for executives, if it's just what are we going to do with data backups? How are we going to take care of Sue, the receptionist, if she's out? Little tiny things can often blow up into big, large things because we didn't think about it, because we never considered the fact that these little things, these risks could add up and something could go wrong. So we've got Michael Redmond here to talk about that this week. Do have some different news for you, though, as far as Facebook has changed its policy on what to do with MP3s and audio. So you cannot get us on Facebook streaming anymore. I'm going to try to get the YouTube videos up on an earlier date so you can listen to them if you want to, streaming through Facebook, but that little app is going to be a little weird. Though I'd still like you to like us on Facebook, so if you look up Reality Check with Craig Price on Facebook, please send a like. I'd certainly appreciate that. As well as going to iTunes. You can bypass that whole on Facebook things. If you just go to iTunes, you can download us every week on Tuesday at iTunes and leave a review if you can. I'd certainly appreciate it. But let's get to the risk management. Without any further ado, let me give you Michael Redmond. Now, in my experience, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, when I talk to project manager types and when I talk to people, especially when it's about risk management, it's always something they want to do, but they don't really get around to it. They only really they really talk about risk management after something has happened. As important as risk management is that something you find as well, is that risk management is one of those things that they should have been doing, but they don't really realize it until they're neck deep in water?
Well, I think project managers look at it differently than a manager would. I think that when we say risk management from a firm, they tend to do some of it, but not all of it. But a project manager, they're looking at the risk on their project. What's the risk of this project not making it? What's the risk if this doesn't happen? But they're not looking at enterprise risk management, which is a totally different thing, which is what the firms are looking at. And if they are a risk manager or if they're a project manager, they need to be looking at not only what could affect their immediate project to make it go delay or risk that might be a problem with their suppliers and such, but what happens if their records aren't backed up and there happens to be a major disaster? What do they do with that project? Do they know where their suppliers are? Do they know how to contact all the people on their team? Do they know if there's a problem with a factory, the way their suppliers are? Do they have alternate suppliers? So those are things that they've taken care of. Have they looked at if there's a problem with a snowstorm or something and they're having difficulty getting supplies across? What do they do? And that's just talking about just supplies, and that's the risk along with that.
But the enterprise risk management covers the entire company, not just a particular project. So it's
absolutely covers the entire company. And within that, project management for risk management is how do we deal with how does this project affect the rest of the company? What happens if there's a problem with the people? What if there's a strike and all the people aren't here tomorrow? What if there is a problem with the building itself, that perhaps we can't get into the building for whatever reason. There could be a strike, and maybe you can't get into your building.
Somebody
and
loses the key.
That could cause absolutely could cause project delays for a week, 2 weeks.
And
are you set up to work remotely? Do you have your databases off-site? Can you access everything? Do you have you dealt with all of the data itself? Have you dealt with the people, the resources, all the things that encompass a company?
And I'm here with Michael Redmond. She is with Redmond Worldwide as an expert in enterprise risk management. And I have you on because you, as I am, going to be at the Rochester Project Management Institute event on the 24th of May. So if you're in the upstate New York, Rochester area, come on by. I definitely want to go to your breakout session. It's going to be very insightful. But I see risk management as a key factor, something that needs to be done regardless. And I think, as you were saying, I think it's managers look at some of it. They do some of it. They don't really look at it too far long term. And there's different types of risks. Wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
What's one of the first things if you're in charge, if you're the manager, and you need to start implementing a risk management plan? There's going to be, no matter what industry you're in or what you do, there's going to be some basics that you need to make sure you follow. So,
absolutely. You want to first decide what are the risks that could possibly affect, let's just say for a corporation. Of course, you can do it for a project too, but let's take a corporation. What are the risks that could possibly affect that? Are there natural disasters, man-made disasters? Are there technological disasters? Are there different type of things? For instance, if you're in a hurricane area, that could be a high risk. However, the impact of that is loss of power, loss of telecommunications. The impacts from those risks are very important. So once you identify all the risks that could affect you, then you want to say, what are the impacts of those risks? How do I deal with that? Then you want to come up with strategies. How do we have alternative mitigating strategies and recoverability strategies if those strategies don't work? You need a written documented plan. You need to have a maintenance program on how do you go back and review this constantly. And you need to have training of your people and testing of the plan to make sure it works.
And we also know there's more than just physical risk. You've talked about, hurricanes and emergencies and damages and things like that, but there's other risks involved as well. Like I can think right off the top of my head, cash flow.
Absolutely.
Different people have different strategies. So some people, treat cash flow completely different from one company to the next. So
absolutely, and making sure that you have loans in place, making sure that who can sign those loans. Especially what's interesting is when there have been, say, a disaster itself, the person who can sign the checks is not available, and no one else is on the signatory list. So, just how do we deal with problems in a company where there are risks that we can't continue?
And do you just start listing off every conceivable possibility that guys could exist, like, Godzilla on one day, earthquake on the next, even
Actually, I don't. What I do is I look at it from what could affect the building, what could affect the technology, what can affect the people, what can affect the utilities, and what can affect the business processes. For instance, if years ago you were Tylenol and you had that Tylenol scare, it didn't matter what you had done. You now had to deal with the fact that the product had a tainted image. So they immediately brought in a crisis manager, immediately with Tylenol, who said, we're withdrawing everything off the markets, we're taking everything back, we're very proactive. Now, there were other companies that had similar scares, and they're not around because they didn't deal with the product ahead of time. What happens if something happens to our product?
Or a reputation.
Our reputation.
I mean, because there was nothing wrong with the product. Technically, there was nothing wrong with the product. They found out later.
Sure.
That's when they found cyanide in Tylenol capsules in the early 80s. For anybody who happened to be a brand new project manager and wasn't alive then, as I'm starting to get older and realize, hey, there's people who are in their 30s who were not born in the 70s.
Absolutely. And talk about image. Even people who were children at the time have heard about the TWA disaster. Well, again, the reason they remember TWA disaster is because they didn't respond for 24 hours. Their plan said that they had to reach the executives of the firm who were not available. And so they didn't respond for almost 24 hours. Meanwhile, Swissair had a major disaster, and no one even remembers it because Swissair responded immediately by taking care of the people, taking care of the families, taking care of the press, making sure that everything was dealt with, and they had all this pre-planned ahead of time, what would happen if. And that's the question. what would I do if? Now think about your own home. You probably have insurance against something if it happens. You probably have extra tools around the house in case something breaks, and how do I fix this? You probably have a list of the plumber if something happens in the middle of the night. You probably have a list of different people for your car. You have different people that are out there. You know what to do if something happens. We do risk management in our personal lives all the time, and then when it comes to corporations, people forget it.
And don't certain entities, certain organizations, they have a different willingness to take certain risks? I mean, don't you have to kind of assess, how much risk is your company willing to take?
Absolutely, because one of the key things is you could spend a ton of money either mitigating something that may not happen or recovering from something that could cost you more to recover it than the incident itself. For instance, think about an old pair of shoes. How many times do you want to get them resold? Before it's not worth it anymore. And it's the same thing in the recoverability. How many times do you want to fix old technology or old servers when it's not worth it anymore? So, there's a risk. So you say, okay, fine, you know what, we can avoid the risk. It's never going to happen. You can mitigate risk. But you can choose to do nothing. You can say, we're not going to do anything, and when the risk happens, we'll deal with it. Or you can say, we're going to try to insure this risk or transfer the risk, maybe send it out to a third party. But what's important about that is you can transfer the risk, but you are still ultimately responsible.
And even if you transfer the risk, there's still gonna be repercussions in the corporation from that risk happening.
Absolutely. And the other thing you want to do is also make sure that if you do outsource any of your perceived possible risk, that you are managing it. Unfortunately, I've seen many companies who are using outsourced firms to do part of their business processes, and they're not making sure that they have a risk management plan, that their outsourced companies have a continuity plan in place that they can recover. And it's not just companies; it's also countries are doing this. New York, in the United States, we have something called COOP, Continuity of Operations, and COG, Continuity of Government. And it's the same thing as risk management, follows the same processes, and it saves government organizations. Imagine if you're waiting for a Social Security check and it doesn't arrive. Well, no one wants to hear that the Social Security office had a problem and they didn't have a plan.
Right. People get fired for that, and people get that really works people up. Now, what do you see as the most common? I guess it wouldn't be a risk, because what I might say is, what is the most common problem that you see actually happening that people need to prepare for? I mean, we have all these risks. What's the one thing that you really see as the biggest problem that people need to prepare for?
Well, it's hard to bring down to one. I can bring that to 5.
Okay,
again.
That's fine.
The building, the technology, right, the people, the utilities, and then I'm going to say the unknown, which is, do you have teams available who can make decisions quickly? Do you have people authorized to make a decision for something you weren't expecting? 9/11 is a prime example. And one of the things I'm most proud about is that the 10 companies that I had done planning for prior to 9/11 all recovered within 24 hours using the plans I put in place for them. And no one anticipated the world trade per se, but we did anticipate loss of building, loss of utilities, loss of access to building, loss of personnel. And so they were able to recover and continue business. They had already had an alternate place to go. Everything was already set up ahead of time, and they are still in business.
Well, and I think one of the key factors is going to be digital and information. If you have records somewhere, right now the big thing is the cloud. If you put everything on the cloud and you have backups, and if you have technology backups everywhere, you can run your business in the short interim from anywhere. If you have a laptop, if you have a couple computers. So, is data backup as big as it seems to be right now?
It's a problem with the cloud has its own problems in that you don't necessarily know where it's residing.
Right, it's because residing on several things.
Whether it has this, right. So that could be certain places. They can have its own issues out there. Plus, you only have so much bandwidth, and many companies can't have a lot of people working at home. They have to have a place for them to go in case of disaster. And then people need to know where that is, a hot site or a warm site, someplace where the people can all be together. Because you can't function if everybody worked at home all the time, we wouldn't need buildings.
That's true.
And so we definitely need to have that taken into consideration. And so that has its own technology problems, and high availability is a technology issue now as a solution. For project managers, they'll understand that you can be back 9999997, or you can be back 9999999, and that goes into your Six Sigma and such. And how much do you want to risk? Are you willing to put into that you want to make sure you can be back? For instance, if you're a trading firm, you have to be back within hours.
Yeah, you're losing millions, if not billions of dollars.
It's also regulated.
Oh,
If you're
okay.
a bank, it's regulated. So they have to have some sort of plan in place. And what's interesting is insurance companies don't have to have plans in place. So that's a little bit scary. So I would never work with an insurance company that I didn't know had a plan in place, and I want to know that they do. And even with my own branch banking, I asked them when I went to open my account, when's the last time you did a successful test? I'm very careful.
I would assume you've got like 9 things, because it sounds like that even when you have a plan in place, you want to do a risk assessment on that plan, which is a risk assessment of something that could go wrong in the first place. So not only are you doing the initial risk assessment, but then you're also doing a risk assessment on the actual plan to take care of the risk.
Well, you're doing maintenance on the plan to make sure that you've dealt with all the risks, for sure.
Now, does that ever pop up where you've got because I would think, knowing I worked with a lot of governments, I work with a lot of people that, I know this happens, they make a plan. They make a plan. 1998, they make a plan.
And it's sitting on a shelf.
And then 2012, a problem happens, but the plan doesn't really cover a lot of the things that have changed in the last.
Right. They may have new manufacturing locations. They may have different department names. They may have different personnel.
Different technology.
Creating different products and different technology.
Yeah, I mean, I can just imagine someone who started in 1995. Not every single person had access to the internet on their phones. No one did.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of issues there in that companies, if every time they're putting new equipment in, they have to make sure that they have their hot site also mapped, so that every time they put new equipment in their building or their data centers, they're mapping it to their hot site. Every time they switch a phone number, they're mapping that to their plan. So there's a lot of work in doing this. It's not something that's effortless, but it's certainly worth doing. And for project managers, if they just look at this risk management from a point from their project, what happens if they're with a supply company that goes out of business? What happens if they're with a vendor that goes out of business? That's a people issue as well as money issues. What if they happen to they're creating a product, and in the middle of creating a product for that specific project, there happens to be a problem with the equipment and there's delays. Well, now we know we can adjust that for time and such in project management. We're taught how to do that. But what things could be mitigated ahead of time? Is there a way that perhaps you could have alternate suppliers? Is there a way that you can have alternate people on your team? And on a small project, that's easier to do. On a large project, you're dealing with quite a bit. But on a building, when you're looking at a PMO dealing with 20, 30 different projects, now you're talking about really interlaying where are the risks here, how do we get all these things done. And from project management who wants to go into risk management, there are a number of different differences from the normal project management process, in that the risks aren't just financial risk, as you mentioned before, but they're everything. What can possibly cause me to be out of business? And that's the key question. And what we'll be doing in the group when we meet in May for PMIs, we'll be going through and we'll actually be giving solutions, strategies, how to put plans together in place. How do you document it? Now we've discussed all the problems. How do you deal with it before it happens so that when it does happen, you're better prepared, both emotionally, both from a financial point of view and from a planning point of view. How do you have all these things dealt with ahead of time?
So how early in the process, and I'm assuming it's going to be fairly early, but how early in the process do you start the risk management in full force? Because, I mean, I would assume at some point things are going to change, and so you're going to have to adapt, but it's not one of these where you wait till everything's done, look back, and start picking apart and finding the problems. How early and in what order? How do you assess which risk is more important versus the other?
Based on likelihood. And also, you look at the impacts. You really want to evaluate your impacts even more. What's the impact? Is it going to be a financial impact, a public relations impact, a legal impact? Is it going to, how long will it take to get back into operation? All of those things have to be taken into consideration. So you look at both the qualitative and the quantitative issues. And I'll be covering a list of those when we do the.
So something might happen frequently, but it may not be that big a deal, so it has less impact, even though the frequency is quite a bit.
Well, if it's happening frequently, part of it, it's probably not risk, it's probably just operational risk.
Okay.
Which is different than enterprise. If you have a boiler that keeps breaking over and over and over, that's something that's operational. But if you have a boiler that's going to burst and not work, now that's a risk.
And so one is more of a maintenance situation, the other one is more catastrophic. Is that the difference I'm seeing?
Exactly.
All right. So we've got all our plans in place. How often should we be updating our risk management plans? Because, like I said, we were talking briefly. We started to talk about how it could be sitting on a shelf for 12 years, but you can't be.
At least annually, what I recommend to people is that they review the risk quarterly, and look at the impacts quarterly, and then look at the entire plan and test at least once a year, if not more often.
So you do that? Do you assign a person, or do you just have a team thing where everybody comes in and just starts poking holes as best they can and finding?
That would work really well, wouldn't it?
Well, I always like people coming in and here's my plan, poke some holes in it so we can make it stronger.
Absolutely. Well, what happens is you actually test it, and when you do is you have very strict scenarios. So the scenarios themselves will cause holes. The scenarios by themselves show you where the problems are, and you never fail a test when you're doing recovery or you're doing a risk analysis process. What happens is you find where there are weaknesses. It's not failing. It's achieving, finding results, finding where the weaknesses are, and then you get to fix them. So it's a great thing if you do a test and you find problems. I always say that if you keep doing tests and the problems never show up, that you're not testing hard enough.
Yeah, you're not either. You're doing the test wrong, and I'm a negative person, so I don't find a problem with the word fail, because I like how they say that failure is not an option. It's not an option. It's a result. It's not the final result, but it's a result. So if something does fail, in my mind, because I don't worry about the strength of a word sometimes, which is probably why I work alone. There's a lot of times I don't mind going, that failed a test, because that means that we can fix that. If it passed the test, that means it still could fail later on because we didn't do it. Maybe we didn't do the test properly.
Exactly. And you want, so you want to make sure, how are we testing it? And anything that didn't work well in the test, you want to make sure you fix it in your plan immediately. And then what you want to do is the next test, everything that didn't work well the time before, you want to test those things first. And scenario writing is a time-consuming, and it's very important to do it properly, because with the wrong scenarios, it's easy to pass. My 10 companies that did so well in the World Trade Center, for each of them, the scenarios I had used was that they had lost 50% of their personnel. Now, either that was going to be from major disease, or 50% of the people all chipped in together, won the lottery together, whatever it might have been. I didn't care why. But I just planned on 50% being out. Never anticipating the world trade, but I did plan on 50% being out. I did plan on the bridges and tunnels were closed in my scenarios. I did plan on the fact that there was no telecommunications available. And so when we did these different scenarios at different times, they already had to put solutions into their plans for these things. So when everything happened on one day, they had strategies in place to deal with everything.
But where are you pulling these scenarios from? Because it sounds like you watch a lot of doomsday movies. Maybe The Walking Dead, there's going to be zombies, there's going to be, you've watched Airport 77, you've all these disaster movies.
And those are worst case, and it might just be something simple, such as a blackout.
But I mean, where are you pulling these strategies from? I mean, is there a guideline, or is it just sitting in a room thinking about what's the worst thing that could realistically happen?
Well, I mean, there's certainly having been in the business for so many years, I certainly have a lot of these, in the back of my head. But there are many different scenarios out there that can be utilized, and by planning on, we'll go through the most typical scenarios that people should include, and I have some charts I put together that I'll be training on that wouldn't be available someplace else. And so I will be giving all this information out, so people that are coming will get a lot of information that wouldn't be available normally. And
before we let you go, because this is going to be on in perpetuity, it'll be on up as long past after the 24th of May. So if someone had missed you and they wanted to ask you some questions, where can they find you?
Well, actually, there's two things they can do. I do have a series of training CDs out that will help people get certified in disaster recovery they can use for studying. And those are on Coop and Cog, and I have some on cybersecurity, and I also have them on business continuity management, so they can get certified through Disaster Recovery Institute. And what I'm very proud about is my CDs are the only CDs in the entire world that have been authorized for continuing education credits from Disaster Recovery Institute. So very excited about that. But they can reach me either through my number, which is 917-882-5453, and I welcome phone calls. They can also reach me by email at msmichaelredmond@redmondworldwide.com. I couldn't make it any longer if I tried. And they can also reach me on my website, which is redmondworldwide, Redmond Worldwide. And again, the phone number is 917-882-5453. And I welcome questions, and I'm available to help people, and I really look forward to having this opportunity, and thank you for today for speaking with me.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and I am going to prepare for the worst possible scenario when I meet you.
Hopefully it won't be the day we meet, but
no, I'm preparing for it though, just in case. So I'm really glad that I got to talk to you first, because now I can totally walk in worst case scenario and still be okay.
Okay, perfect.
We'll see you in May.
Thanks a lot.
I want to thank once again Michael Redmond for joining me. Remember, you can find us both May 24th in Rochester, New York at PMI-Rochester.org to sign up and register. We'd love to see you. As always, you can email me, Craig at SpeakerCraigPrice.com, with any guest suggestions, comments, reviews. You can do whatever you like. I'd certainly love to hear from you. We'll see you next week.